Today we're talking about messaging recommendations reports, which is like a tragically bad name. I apologize. It's a very functional thing. So I gave it a functional name when I first started putting these things together. And this was just like over a decade ago. So point was not to be creative, and it's still not to be creative, but rather just to help your client understand, or at that point it was like an internal client, understand what's up, what you're going to do. The purpose of today's tutorial is to give you a template and walk you through it. And this is because Paige, who was in my mastermind and is now in the 10X freelance copywriter, slacked me and was like, hey, some of us were talking about how we'd like to see your messaging recommendations report, but the one that I shared in the mastermind was protected by an NDA. It's just, it's actual client recommendations. So I can't show that. Myrna, it was you. This is all your fault today, Myrna. Good job. So we bumped some things around in our calendar, and I decided to give Paige and Myrna what they wanted. I'm just a giving person. I'm just like really, really generous. Just kidding. Okay, so we're going to go through and show you this messaging recommendations report, just the template, because I can't show you the finished version, but I'll talk you through what to put on different slides. It's really long. This is a 20-minute tutorial, so I'm not going to focus on every single slide. A lot of it is just like, you know what to put on there. Just go with your best instinct, and then keep working through it and getting better every time you do this. But the point of this document is to be able to synthesize all of the stuff you were doing in the research and discovery phase, combine it with what your client, internal, if you're in-house, or external, has told you about, if they know their voice, or if they don't. If part of your job is to identify the best voice for them to use going forward, you'll do that usually in here, unless your whole project is around identifying and recommending the voice to use. But so this is where you synthesize all of that research and everything that your client has told you, and put it into a single space, and then present it to them, so that when you go forward and write web copy or email copy, they're already on board with what they're going to see. And in many cases, they're already excited about what they're going to see too. So let me walk you through this, and then be sure to use Q&A if you have any questions you want answered before the end of the session. A little bit into this, Sarah will chat out the link, not quite yet, but she'll chat out the link to the template, so you can go ahead and use it. But for now, just like watch what's happening and then get the template, so that you're not busy, because the template I'm going to show you is in Google Slides, and I've taken some of the examples out so that you can use it without having my examples inside of it. So let me share my screen. Okay, so you should now be seeing messaging recommendations for, and then you just put the client name in. Now again, whatever you rename this, whatever you feel like, this has done the job for me with every client that I've had, basically for almost every client that I've worked with. Maybe not in the first years when I was like still figuring this stuff out, but as I've moved forward, so you don't have to worry about getting super creative or inventive. And in fact, when you get really inventive, it can just, it's usually clear over clever, right? That's what we're always going for. But be sure to brand this with your branding. This is all our stuff for CH Agency. This is our font that we use, etc. So go ahead and use whatever you want to, put your logo in, etc. Do what you normally do. This is just the content to fill in. You want to open by restating the goal wherever possible. So if you're dealing with a business, businesses like talking about goals. They like talking about how they're going to measure success and why they're even sitting here in the first place, because they don't like wasting their time. None of us really do. But this is an important thing, and you don't want to gloss over it, especially when you're presenting. Repeat the main goal of why you're even working on this project, and whatever that main goal might be, like it's really the reason that they brought you in. And then any secondary goals that might have come out in like your kickoff call, or even in your pre-proposal call, depending on how you do your work. But you just want to state those quickly. Don't get, in every case here, except in the case where we're using VOC data and putting it on the page, In every other case, you just want to be as crisp as you can with what you're saying. Then you want to remind them of what they want. So this is outside of like the goals. Like the goal is to increase revenue using X or whatever. This is more of like you want to position yourself as Y in the market. You want to look better than the competition. You probably wouldn't put it that way. But those sorts of other things that have come up, especially in kickoff calls and in interviews with founders and other people, like the founding team, with marketers, things like that. So this is where you want to put that. For example, for a client, it might be you want to sell career success / power. You want to sell the ability to drive transformational change. You want to make it easy to advocate persuasively for the marketing team. You want to come out guns blazing. You want to make every other competitor look like a toy. You want to create and own the category. So importantly here, their most ambitious priority, I like to put at the very bottom of the list, because when you're actually presenting this to them, when they're reading it by themselves, which they won't really do because you're always going to present this and then give it to them afterward, when they're just reading it, they might pay more attention to that opening point. But when you're about to transition to the next slide, that's where there's like this pause, right? Where if you put their most ambitious priority there, then that's the thing that's hanging in their head before you move on. So keep that in mind. Like create and own the category is a really ambitious goal. They need to remember that this isn't a small undertaking, that they're not looking for small wins. They're looking for something big. And in most cases, even when you're writing something small, they're still looking for that to be part of a bigger initiative or a bigger strategy. So remind them of that. Don't be afraid to remind them of that, because they're going to need to buy in to what you're doing. Then you want to list out the challenges that you noted. So as you did the research, as you talked to them, as you did that initial kickoff call, etc., challenges they noted. If they noted something about the competition, it can be good to lead with that, especially if the competition was a big deal for them. If they're like, you know what, we're killing it, but people are starting to notice, and now they're just basically cherry picking the features that they can tell people are most excited about, and they're leading with those, etc., etc. Okay, fine. So they're worried about the competition without wanting to say you're worried about the competition, because nobody wants to hear that. But what the competition is doing could be a challenge. What the market is doing, if the market is shifting somehow, if the economy is shifting somehow. And these are challenges that they noted, not that you necessarily are bringing up. This is still like just the preamble before you get into this. So just setting the stage for the world in which you're going to be writing copy to persuade people. Any challenges they might have noted about what the product or service does versus does not do. So we do X really well, but we don't really do Y well, and people are starting to look for Y. Like people want an all-in-one solution, but we're focused on building just the best parts and not that extra stuff that most people don't need. That might be a challenge they noted, and that would be important for you when you're messaging. If they mentioned any potential flaws in their value proposition, and then any other stuff that comes up, right? These are just examples. So when I walk you through this template, you can like start to imagine what you might put in there, but you might not put any of these on here. Ideally, your client, when you're talking to them in your kickoff call especially, they will express some of the challenges, and you will like dig to get those. Like, why now? Why is this so important now? What's going on in your industry? What's going on in your business right now? And that is what makes its way on here. But again, keep things short and crisp, because this is going to be when you present this recommendations doc to your client, it's going to take the 60-minute meeting. And if your bullets are really long, it's going to be even longer. So, and he'll end up just reading them off, and you don't want to do that. Mandy, we haven't chatted out the link yet. You'll get that afterward. I just want you to kind of focus on the template right now. Cool. Sarah just chatted that to you. Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. I knew you were going to anyway, but whatever. I see chat open and I just like react to things. Okay. So then we get into what we saw and heard. And this is exactly, if I want you to replace the copy that you're seeing, I'll put curly brackets around it, replace all of that, including the curly brackets, to be really clear. If there's no curly brackets around it, you can basically just take that, what we saw and heard. And in this case, I actually accidentally left our logo on this, but the template you have won't have that. So what we saw and heard, and then you're going to get into what you saw and heard. This is like the research and discovery side. I think they're really called curly brackets. Yeah. So you want to go in and say, okay, engage in an immersive message finding experience. However you describe that, that's just how we describe it. And then you want to list all of the research that you did. So this should be kind of like a mega list. Like this is where you show, instead of just having to tell them that you're not coming up with this on your own, you're showing them just how much goes into it. So if you're like, we did 7 interviews with the team, we did 5 interviews with your customers, we did 2 interviews with past customers, we did 3 interviews with vendors, we did 1 survey with 98 responses and another thank you page survey that brought in 140 responses. You just want to go through all of that. You did 5 usertesting.com sessions. Just list it off. And that's all you really want to do is list off. You don't have to say what happened in those yet. You just want to list off what you did here so that they're like, oh, okay, cool. Again, you're just at this point still trying to get them on board with like, yeah, this is still a very important thing, etc. Now, this is the part where you're going to start listing out what you saw and heard in kind of categories. So as you're doing all of this research, you're going to start like creating buckets of things like, oh, this messaging seems to be about money outcomes. Like people are looking to save money. People are looking to make money. This is about saving time. This is about being more productive. This is about being more efficient. And you'll start to like bucket those things. Or it might be outcomes that they have, like spending more time with their kids, spending more time with their partner, going on vacation, those sorts of buckets that you'll have. And that's where you would list these here so they have a sense for like what you're going to tell them. The basic rule of tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. And this is really the beginning of like, tell them what you're going to tell them. So it's just like, here are the categories of what we saw people talking about. Again, this is the what you saw and heard section. So it's all about what other people say. Everything you found in research and discovery, but synthesized. Not summarized, synthesized. Okay, so you put as many categories as there are. It might be 2, it might be 12, whatever came out of it. And in this case, an example is if it was the categories for the one in question were like money, output and utilization, productivity, visibility, facts, not feelings, et cetera, et cetera. And then we get into those. So each bullet point here becomes its own slide with VOC data on it, which you're about to see. So category A would be like money. So if money is here as our first one, this would be titled money. Again, no curly brackets. And then you put VOC in there, like actual VOC that supports that money message or whatever that bucket, that category is. You put a voice that like an exact snippet from what customers said about money outcomes they're looking for, or how the product has saved them money, or how it has made them money, or the service has, etc. But that's what's going to happen here across all these different slides. So in the case of money, exact VOC that we captured is, I just want to know that I'm getting my money's worth from the marketers, or what % of work is going to revenue generating content, etc. So you put those on the page, and when you're going through and presenting this to the client, you're really just helping them understand that these are the kinds of things people are saying. This is the kind of stuff that might impact how you write copy that has to do with money outcomes. So if you end up, if the client's like, yeah, the value prop is around saving money, then you're going to be pulling in voice of customer data like this to write your copy. And as you're giving this presentation later, you're helping them understand that, right? Like the reason you want to know this is so that when I write the copy, you know where those messages are actually coming from. And of course, they bought into your conversion copywriting process, so they already know that you're going to use voice of customer data and frameworks and a little bit of your own like artsy brainy part to write really kick-ass copy. And I mean a little bit, you do not want to emphasize the heart. Category B, and you just keep going on from there and just continuing on until you're done with all your categories, etc. Then what I like to do is, after I've started pulling, like this is still in the what we saw and heard section. So what was a problem that you started to hear? Like what was a thing that kept coming up where you're like, is that like a problem? Is that like a need that we're going to have to address? And again, this is all just to give them what they need to know so that later they can review your copy in a more informed way. So you're not springing stuff on them. Like you're not just throwing things at them. This way they're aware that, oh, X problem came up as I was doing this research. So in this case, there was a value proposition problem. We would imagine there was a value proposition. For features, which means you either need a stronger sense of an algorithmic secret sauce or more of an emotional pull. So, and this is you consulting, right? You're hearing in the voice of customer data, you're hearing, and with what the client said, that there's this sense that, oh, everybody's starting to do this now, and I really just have to choose like the cheapest one out there because it's all just a features game. So knowing that, then you identify, oh crap, there's a value proposition problem here. So what are some ways that we might hypothesize we could solve it? And that might be, okay, we're going to look to express that there is this algorithmic secret sauce going on that you need to start messaging as like the reason to choose this solution, or you're going to need a stronger emotional pull, or whatever that is that you come up with. But point here is identify that problem and talk them through it a little bit. This is an example. This isn't the actual thing. This is what you'd want to fill in. This is the example. And then get into an assessment of their current copy. Don't go overboard. And when you're assessing a client's copy, always have strong empathy for the person who wrote it in the first place. So always be as black and white, and I don't mean that as in bad or good. I mean, try to keep emotion out of it. Rather, remember that somebody wrote that copy and meant well by it. And they're as embarrassed of bad copy as you are when you come up with copy that someone tears down. You're like, oh my gosh, I know. Okay, but here's why that happened. So be careful, because it might have been the founder who is now hired you, who wrote that, or it might have been their sister or something like that. And you do not want to offend that person ever. Always be careful when you're critiquing your client's copy, and really when you're critiquing anyone's copy. Put yourself in their shoes. So just be careful that you're always being very useful with your assessment. And then that brings us to the next section around what we're thinking about. So this would be a title slide for you, what we're thinking about. I like to keep these pretty informal sounding, so it's not all buttoned up and this is a formal slide, because we're going to be talking pretty naturally with the client. We're not informal with them, but we're just being natural. So here's what we're thinking about. Here's what we heard, all of this stuff. Here's what that's led us to think about. For me, that's where I generally find it useful to pull in something that supports everything we're about to say. So if it's if the client in one of their interviews said something that was oh, wow, that's interesting, I hadn't thought of it that way. You can pull in someone else's quote, so it's not just about what you're thinking about. So yeah, a statement in an interview that got you thinking. It could have been the founder said something that had a little light bulb moment for you, whatever that is. Put that here so they know it's not just the musings of a creative person, but rather people are saying things and it's making you think X. Any other curiosities that have come up, what you're thinking about, what you're starting to think about as you think about writing the copy. So as you're doing all of this research, you will start thinking things. Of course you will, I wonder if this is even the right market for them, or I wonder if we should emphasize this feature that everybody's talking about, but we really don't see played up that much in the copy, or other stuff that's coming up for you as you're listening. This is where you're starting to bring that up for them. So they're so they can pause you and say well, hold on. That's interesting. Why do you say that? And then you get to have a discussion with them. And that will help make life better when it's time for you to write copy and then review that copy. So just do as many of these as you need to. You can't tell this is another slide on the same one. I hit forward and this is just the same slide. And then you get into your recommendations. And recommendations are going to be around voice, around high-level messaging, around the value prop, and actually getting into some copy in some cases. So voice, primary value prop. If you have any customer-facing value proposition options, you would put those here, and then you put sample copy. And again, this is just the slide itself. So the only thing you're replacing here is that number sign with the actual number, 3 customer-facing value proposition options, and then some sample copy. Now, if you're well, voice isn't part of this project, I still think it's useful to reiterate to them what the voice is that you've heard, because they're oh, we already have our voice. Cool. Just reiterate it. Make sure that everybody's on the same page, because you will usually, for messaging recommendations reports, have sample copy in it where you're using the voice, and they need to still be remembering, or they need to know, oh yeah, that was our voice. That's our voice. We're all aligned on that. That's why the copy sounds like this. Primary value prop, if you are including value proposition as like exercises as part of your project, which a lot of us do when we're dealing with SaaS companies in particular, then you'll want to include that here. Now, if you aren't, then it would just be other things around other recommendations that you're making. Pretty straightforward stuff. Okay, so this is the voice slide. Don't spend too much time on this stuff unless it's an entire voice project, in which case you wouldn't be doing this sort of layout, this sort of presentation anyway. You want to, I find it useful to put a picture that represents the voice that we're talking about. So the brand name voice is, and then what it is, and then just fill in that little template there where you're replacing the blanks and the curly brackets with actual adjectives, etc. Just make sure that everybody's bought into what this is before you move forward, because you're going to be writing copy and they're going to see copy that uses this. So make sure you pause on this when you're reminding them of the voice or making the voice recommendation to them to get aligned before you move forward. In the presentation, I mean. Okay, and now we're going to get into the value proposition. So you state the value proposition. So you say primary value proposition, and that's the internal one, where it will usually be like brand name is, and then, or brand name does, and then the other stuff that follows that, whatever that might be. So if it's, and we have books, ebooks at Copy Hackers on like how to develop your value proposition. So I'm not going to get too deeply into that right now, but it's really a statement of what's unique, most unique and highly desirable about the product that you're, or service that you're trying to sell. Our value prop can be at the brand level, it can be at the product level, it can even be at the feature level. So just make sure you're clear on what that is. Usually in this recommendations report, we're talking about the brand level value proposition, but if you're writing a sales page for a particular product, you might want to be at the product level value proposition. Okay. And now the customer facing options. So now you're going to show them the actual copy that you're recommending. And this is going to read a little bit like taglines sometime, but in the case of working with SaaS companies, it's likely to be the headline on the home page. If it's working on a long form sales page, it might be a repeated message throughout the page, and especially in the closer area of the page. It's that snappy thing that they can walk away with and kind of build a whole brand around. So you're going to put that tag number one, whatever that statement is, you're going to write it there. And then you're going to say X person, like marketers, then a verb of achievement or accomplishment with product name. So marketers will build better marketing teams with HR for marketers, or whatever that's called. But you're just going to complete that really straightforward formula. In this case, as an example, GitPrime's new site is live, and it's the one that I showed the team in the mastermind. So what we do after we put this together, so replacing tag one here was engineers build business. That's what the tagline said. That's what like the customer facing value prop was, engineers build business. And then we showed it to them in a space where they could start imagining it. The more you can do that, and this is why I recommend you get familiar as a copywriter with Photoshop or with Canva, really just like doing what it takes to help bring your copy to life so the client better understands it. As soon as you put it into a picture, you win. So take that copy and put it into a view like this so they can see, okay, this is how our value prop would appear on the homepage. And obviously be like, you know what, guys, I'm not a designer, but this is one way that it might appear, just to give you a sense for how you might use this. So as soon as they can see that kind of in real life, then they can get a better sense for how they really feel about it. And then you talk them through that. So you would replace this, of course, with your own mock-up. And then what I like to do is make sure I identify if it's going to work. And this is just a basic heuristic analysis. Is this going to work for the people that you're trying to speak with? So in this case, it was executive stakeholders and decision makers, senior engineering leaders, engineering operators, and engineers. It hit the mark on all four. Cool. We're also trying to solve in SaaS for these things: acquisition, activation, retention, revenue, and referrals. It's called Pirate Metrics if you're not familiar, because it's R. Acquisition, activation, retention, revenue, and referrals. And we're like, yeah, it'll solve for all of those things too. So that helps them understand it's not just about their gut, but will it work through their funnel? Will it carry people through their funnel, etc. And then if there's any quote that you might happen to have from a team member that reinforces the proposed value prop, then you put that there. And I think in this case, it was like Travis, the founder, was like, engineers just love building cool shit. And that was like his actual statement. And so I wrote that in there. He said that swear word, so I put it down on the page because he was comfortable with it. I'm comfortable with it. If you're not, don't worry about it. You can always like whatever it. But in this case, that was his exact quote. So I put it there and it supported the value prop. And of course, the founder, seeing his own quote supporting that, if he already liked the value prop, now he's like, yes. And if he didn't like it, now he's like, well, maybe, because I did say that. And then, sorry, this should be tag 2, have cold. And the tag 2 in this case was at scale. And so we had things like visibility at scale, productivity at scale, insight at scale, evaluation at scale, whatever that is, but you're going to put your second example in there with other mock-ups. In this case, it was, the whole idea was the at scale thing. So we just showed how it would change, the copy would change and other things they would figure out, but this is the point. And then we showed if it was solving for everybody, and who it wasn't solving for. It's not solving for engineers, which are the ultimate people that need to say yes to this, and it's not solving across the funnel. So you want to make sure that you present a couple that do solve, like that do hit all the points, and then a couple that you might actually feel could be strong, but they might not hit the mark. And this is useful in the event that you've been hearing the same kind of phrasing coming up, and we heard at scale come up again and again when we were working with GitPrime, and we didn't think that they wanted that for the value prop, but it did make, it made me start thinking about how it could be used as a value prop, and I couldn't get it out of my head. And then when I did this analysis here to see who it would resonate with, and found that only 2 of them would, then it was easy for it to kind of slip out of my mind. And then it's also helpful in the event that the client was thinking at scale should be part of their value prop. Then when they see, oh yeah, 1, I'm not sure I love it. 2, it's not really solving for all the parts that we needed to solve for. Cool, now we can kind of eliminate any ideas that might otherwise spring up in like brainstorming sessions. So that's a useful thing to do. And then we're getting into sample copy, and this is where we're at the end of it. So by this point, the client should be like kind of stoked about what they've seen, and now you're gonna like finish with a bang because they might not even have expected to see sample copy yet. And you're gonna walk them through it, and you're gonna educate them a bit as you do. Now, by the time they hire you, they'll understand you're a conversion copywriter. They may understand that you speak in stages of awareness and have other rules that other copywriters don't follow. Yeah, we're going to show them. We're going to remind them of that. So we're going to walk them through sample copy for each of the stages of awareness. It's unlikely you will for unaware. I never write copy for unaware people. That's usually a really top of funnel content sort of thing. So I would get into problem aware. So I'm going to tell them, okay, this is the copy that we would share, sample copy for someone who's problem aware, and then tell them what that might be. Like if an engineer is X, right? You just fill that in. And just help them understand, oh, an engineer who doesn't understand that they have a problem or that there's a solution yet, they're just starting to feel the problem. Like, I don't know who's who on my gigantic remote team. Like, I can't even figure out my team at this point. So the problem aware, that's it. So then you want to express what that is. So focus on problems driving, let's say, engineering managers to seek a solution. And then you want to express the proposed CTA as well. So they're not always walking around thinking, oh, every single person should always be starting a trial. Because once you propose copy to them, once the actual copy is ready to go for a problem aware audience, they'll need to be reminded at that point that the CTA should not be to start a trial or book a demo. And then you show them sample copy. And this is where you take that voice of customer data and you put it on the page. And this is the beginning of a repeatable messaging doc, which is a really helpful thing for a copywriter. So you can take this, use it as a starting point, and then just keep fleshing it out as you come up with new copy. Now that's another conversation entirely, the whole repeatable messaging thing. But this is where you'd actually just start writing the sample copy. So if you're like, okay, here's how that value prop might work for a problem-aware person landing on a page that's like a 2-word page. Okay, here's the headline that I would write. Here's proposed body copy 1. Here's proposed body copy 2, etc. And you go through and you do that. This is a second slide that does the same thing. Then solution aware. Again, you're kind of taking a lot of what's already here and then including, and really you don't have to modify anything here outside of removing the logo. And then you do more of the same, but this is for a solution-aware audience. You're talking about solutions they may have tried that might have frustrated them and leading them toward product awareness, and then you get into product awareness. So you're going to remind your client that means this is where we get to start talking about features. We get to start with the most compelling features, of course, etc. And the CTAs are going to be more around X, Y, and Z. And you just repeat. And in this case, you'll have like, because it's for the product or service, you may have more of the actual like screenshots and demos and other sorts of videos and GIFs that you put in here. And that leads you to most aware, where you're gonna like show them a really quick like mega list of what might appear at the bottom of a page once you move someone from product to solution, or sorry, from problem to solution to product to most aware. This would be the closer section at the bottom of your page. And then any other copy considerations you have, like if you know that they want to use a message about how they get marketers to complete their tasks 20% faster. Well, if there's an objection to that has surfaced so far, then you want to put that there. So these are other considerations that will help you as you go forward writing copy. You get aligned with the client on what you're probably not going to actually say, even though it's come up. So this cool message came up. We know it sounds interesting, but there's this objection over here that we'd have to address. We might address it, but just so you know, here are some of those challenges as we go forward and write the copy. And that is the end of it. That's where we would end. And so, Sarah, yeah, if you don't mind chatting out the link to the Google Slides, and then y'all can go forward and use that yourself, the secret link. Yes, that was a much longer tutorial than 20 minutes, but it always is. I mean, it is, but hopefully you can now put together a messaging recommendations report, which can actually be something that you sell as a project unto itself. So you wouldn't share this until after you presented it to the client. Wouldn't share, so I wouldn't like send it to them. Yeah, I still send it about like 10 or 15 minutes beforehand, because you don't want them to be like thinking the whole time, when do I get my copy? Will I get my copy? But you also don't want to give them too much time in advance to go through it. So I hope you find this valuable. It really is a lot for you to go forward and start doing if you do this, and you can sell this as a project unto itself. So once you do the research, if you know that your client is looking for value props, voice, etc., this is a great template to go with. Awesome. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Sarah. And we'll see you in our next tutorial Tuesday. Have a good day, guys. Bye.
It's the 90s.